While I was on on a little bit of a vacation, big news hit. And normally I don't lead off the show with video game stuff. Normally it's baseball, normally it's movies, but this one was merited basically leading off the show with, and that is the Nintendo Switch 2 has been announced finally by Nintendo, and to the relief of some people, and specifically their marketing department, because leaks were all over the place for the last 2 weeks of 2025. It seemed like everybody knew what this system was going to be before Nintendo even announced it. It looks like a bigger and better Switch, and why wouldn't you do that if you were Nintendo, right? Like, the Switch has been a phenomenal success since its launch on March 3rd, 2017. So for the last 8 years, it has been kind of dominating the market, and you can definitely see a lot of copycats out there. A lot of, obviously the Steam Deck definitely is influenced by its design. And it was a success really from the get-go, merging their two pillars of hardware, which was at the time before it launched was the Wii U and the 3DS, and it kind of blew up. I mean, I remember in March you couldn't get a Switch to save your life unless you were one of the lucky few that pre-ordered and got in. And then since in the last 8 years, pre-orders have just kind of been a nightmare scenario for anyone trying to buy new hardware. But Nintendo released this new Switch 2 trailer, which kind of outlined some details and kind of hinted at others. There's been a lot of speculation that obviously it was gonna get bigger, that there were going to be magnetic Switch Joy-Con controllers, that there was going to be some sort of mouse capability, and that kind of stuff was delineated in the trailer. And my first thought was, yeah, of course. I think after about 8 years of dealing with this kind of hardware, you would want to stay on the same train, and you would want some improvements. Obviously, rolling on those Joy-Cons in the very, very beginning was a kind of a problem. You could get them stuck if you did it a certain way. The form factor, to me, was a little bit small. I was kind of shocked coming from their history of consoles, that how small the Joy-Cons felt in your hands, right? It really felt like you were playing an extension of the 3DS, and losing those bigger buttons from the Wii U, from the Wii, was a kind of a step back, right? A lot of people said it looked sleeker. It was less of a Fisher-Price toy that the Wii U was. But for me, I really enjoy those bigger buttons. And in fact, when I move over to play on PlayStation or on Xbox, those bigger buttons, those bigger form factor, really, to me, feels more comfortable in my hands. That said, this device is definitely marketed towards kids. So it's an interesting move for them, because you think that you'd want to cater to your biggest audience, right? The bigger screen is nice. It doesn't appear to be an OLED screen. It appears to be an LCD screen, if you were to believe all the leaks. They have added a USB-C charging port on the top of it. And they've added a stand that seems to be a little bit more practical and useful than the paper clip that was on the original Switch. So they also boast basically a higher processing out of this hardware, as you would expect in any kind of new generation of hardware. It looks like the screen is going to be 1080p, and they have announced that they're going to go more in depth in 3 months. And yeah, so far so good. I mean, it looks like a nice piece of hardware, as all new pieces of tech that are announced are, and as they, the hype would make you believe. What's going to make this thing sing is essentially the software that's on it, right? I'm excited to see these Joy-Con operate as mice. There's been a lot of games on the Nintendo Switch that kind of would seem to operate a little bit better if there was kind of mouse control. My first thought initially was, well, Mario Maker 2 or Mario Maker 3, whatever the subsequent game in that series, that's fixed, because you could really feel the difference in, hey, without that Wii U gamepad, it was very, very difficult to make levels and design things with precision. They tried a lot of stuff with the new Nintendo Switch, with the Mario Maker 2 to add radial wheels and make it a little bit better when you're dealing with the Joy-Con, but it never truly kind of lived up to what it originally was on the Wii U. There's also games like Civilization and Factorio and simulation games that would definitely, or RPG games, CRPG games that would really benefit from having mouse control. There's the old DS library that potentially could be exploited there. I actually have a couple copies of Spirit Tracks and Phantom Hourglass that have essentially been trapped in cartridge form for years, right? That might take advantage of that if you're playing on the TV and you need that kind of capability to help you out. So that was really, really cool, right? To see that. Other than that, though, it was kind of a little bit less Nintendo-like than normal, I would say. I think from generation to generation, especially as of late, if you think about from the GameCube to the Wii, from the Wii to the Wii U, from the Wii U to the Switch, there has been such dramatic differences within each of the system, and that it would keep you kind of hooked and pondering about how things are going to play, right? My first thought goes to when the Wii was announced way back in 2006, those motion controllers, those square controllers, it was very hard for me to figure out, like, how are you going to play a 3D Mario on this thing? Not realizing that, you're going to have a controller and a nunchuck, as they called it back then. And also playing 2D games horizontally on the side, it made you think a little bit more. With this new announcement being derivative is too hard of a word, but with it being more iterative of the previous system, there's less to kind of wonder about, right? It really rides the success wave that they've been having for the last 8 years, and hopefully the software that is available upon launch will be enough to kind of propel this thing into the same kind of success that the previous console had. Because other than the mouse capability, there's not really much to ponder about what the hardware is going to do. It's almost a known quantity at this point. My other thought, too, was the form factor, right? If you've ever traveled with a Switch is a pretty bulky item, right? It is not the Game Boy. It is not the Game Boy Pocket. There is no pocket that this console is going to fit in. So it's going to be a little bit a bigger form factor and a little bit more clunky to deal with. And again, going back to like their biggest audience are kids, right? Who are not going to, acclimate well to bigger devices. It is a interesting move that they decided to go bigger and bigger and bigger. At some point, it's like phones. Like phones got bigger and bigger and bigger until we couldn't reach the actual app that we needed to, and then all of a sudden we had smaller and smaller sizes. So in about 10 years, when the Nintendo Switch 2 becomes obsolete, it'll be interesting to see what kind of form factor they kind of go with. The dock has had some changes to it. I'm curious to see if it does offer the same kind of things that the dock does. I was kind of surprised to see that it wasn't like open-faced or anything like that. And there's a new button. The only reason I say I'm surprised that it wasn't open-faced was because there were reports way back when the Switch had been announced that the dock was scratching the screen. So I was surprised that there wasn't just an open-faced kind of docking mechanism that prevented that from happening again. A lot of talk has been about the naming convention of this system. Obviously, everyone harkens back to the Wii and the Wii U and people's confusion going into the supermarket. Going into the store, into the electronics store and Best Buy, and trying to find the right console to get. You're not probably going to have that problem here. Obviously, with the gigantic number 2 hitting you in the face, you kind of know that this is the successor to the previous console that you had. So, in a way, it is one of the more boring announcements from Nintendo that there's been. But at the same time, they're riding a success wave. So why change something that works? Why go dramatically in a different direction, and give yourself that opportunity to kind of, not have it be successful, fall on your face, right? So it should be interesting. I'm very curious in April when they come out with a new direct for the system, and they're going to have events with hands-on, how people will feel. I'm very curious about the magnets and how long it will take before those magnets start to fail, if they fail. I know with the Joy-Con in general, there was a lot of give with those rails that they kind of slid on. Eventually, they would start to kind of wobble. I'm very curious to see what the problems with this new console will be, because there are always problems that arise with new console launches. They also showed a new Mario Kart here, and again, this is another hint at it really doesn't matter. It's going to be the software that's going to drive the hardware at the end of the day. With the alleged power specs that have been kind of leaked, seems like Nintendo's taking the same approach with the console as they have since really abandoning the GameCube back in the day, that they're not going to have the most powerful console. They don't care. They will be a generation behind to keep the price lower than it needs, so that you're not paying $500 to $600 for a console, and to keep it more affordable. And they're going to drive with the directive that their first party software is going to be the most attractive. And honestly, when you have renders that are kind of based in a cartoony life, there isn't much consideration for how high res it is, because honestly, you can go back to the Wii era and play Super Mario Galaxy in SD and standard definition, and because you're having such a good time and because it looks so good, it doesn't really become much of a consideration, right? That said, there are some games. A lot of people mentioned Tears of the Kingdom. Breath of the Wild, upon launch, had frame rate issues when you went through grassy areas. So hopefully they will power the system up a little bit more to kind of make those games shine even more than they already do. So it's going to be an interesting 3 months for sure. I'm a little bit disappointed that the speculation period has ended. A lot of people have stated that Nintendo letting these leaks go wild missed their opportunity to announce. But in essence, I kind of felt the opposite. I think the speculation period fuels not only some of the most creative renders online that you can see, because God knows, before the Wii U launched, before the Wii launched, before the GameCube launched, there are always people online creating fake renders of what this thing could be. And those tend to be some of the most creative looking 3D renders of what a system could be. Sometimes way impractical to make or bizarre. Like, they would never take that direction, but it's always curious to see what people think that the next console will look like, or what the next crazy zany move that Nintendo will do. So we wait until April, until eventually it comes out. They do have events that stretch into June. My guess originally was, it feels like they're on a 7-8 year cadence with consoles, if you take out the Wii U's failure. And I would assume that they would have stayed exactly the same course as they did for the previous Switch and launching in March. But since they have these events, I imagine it's going to be further down the line. But the last thing to say on this new console is that there's speculation about what that new button is. I would imagine a lot of renders previously had that C letter on them. I would guess that it's a cursor button. If this thing really does have mouse capability, there's probably some sort of reason that it needs to be pressed in order to activate to make sure that it is a mouse. A lot of people have speculated that it's a camera or a social kind of button that kind of brings you to a hub, similar to like Miiverse. But to be honest, I think it's probably way more practical than that. Like, I feel like if you want to put it into mouse mode, they probably just made it a dedicated button. Some of the big misses too that I want to kind of mention here is one, in maybe it's a price consideration to keep it down, but not concluding like an OLED screen, or maybe there is, maybe they just haven't announced it yet. I'm curious to see if that USB-C on the top is not only for charging but for headphone capability. I mean, a lot of our headphones have kind of moved from Lightning, from 1/8 jack to Lightning to USB-C. So it's because it's so prominently next to the audio jack. I wonder if there's dual capability there. The other thing is, those bigger buttons on the top of the Joy-Con and whatever it places into will probably make those controllers in Joy-Con mode a little bit more practical than they were before. I mean, if you ever played with the right Joy-Con, a multiplayer game horizontally, it was not a comfortable experience if you were, like an adult, right, playing. I mean, your hands can swallow those Joy-Cons. They're so ridiculously small. So seeing those form factor get bigger is a positive for me. And then the last thing I wanted to say too was analog triggers do not seem to be a part of this console. It seems to be, if I freeze frame it around the trailer, it appears that they're going to stick with the same kind of clicky, digital triggers that they have. So that thought for GameCube integration to get those analog triggers back in is probably not going to be a consideration this time around. And then lastly, I'm very curious with this new console to see what Nintendo does with some of their endeavors that did work and then some of them that didn't, right? You can look back at some of the things upon launch, specifically the Nintendo Online. Like, I'm curious to see how they continue that into the next generation, right? They've already said that all the Switch games that you bought are backwards compatible, which is a very, very pro-consumer move. And they basically took the practice of rebuying Super Mario Brothers on a digital console on the eShop and applied it to a subscription, so you weren't constantly rebuying the same games. That was such a plus to do. A lot of people kind of frown at the idea of buying another subscription, but rebuying the same game over the course of 20 years just became annoying. So those things, I think, were definitive pluses. Making those Nintendo accounts transfer over is such a pro-consumer move, and it's good to know that they're probably going to continue that in the future. Some of the things that they need to fix on this console is how the user interface kind of works. I think there was probably a drive for simplicity coming from the Wii U era, where there was so much integration and you'd see all the people come in, and they took a hard left turn to simplicity in the next console because they needed to. I'd like to see some of the fun come back in the user interface, some of the customization that kind of came later in the life cycle of the console come back to the system. There shouldn't be a reason that the Switch interface or the UI design should be as boring going forward. They have to fix the shop. There's noticeable, and in midway through the console's life cycle and the Switch's life cycle, you could start to see considerable lag start to happen that wasn't there upon launch with the shop, because it was loading not just 8 games, it was loading 8,000 games, right, for you to purchase. They need to fix that. They need to make it more snappy. They need to make it more accessible. They need to make it easy to search for games that you want to find outside of 2 options of newest release and download only or bestsellers or whatever. They need to give more options for more customization to find the things that you would like. I'm kind of curious to see if they integrate any kind of AI too into the user interface. I imagine they already kind of do some sort of data collection in terms of trying to figure out and try to serve you up similar things that you'd like. But this would seem to be the perfect opportunity to put something like that into the eShop's user experience to kind of serve you up similar games that you might like. That's really customized to your account. I imagine that's probably already happening. So maybe I'm just shooting from the hip here with ideas. The shovelware problem has to stop in this next generation. It was disappointing to me to see how because of its success, it became a haven for horrendous shovelware, downloadable software, race to the bottom prices, and that just filled up the eShop to the point where it was hard to, unless you were looking for something specific, you didn't go through the library in a systematic way to go find anything. You just found what you were looking for, downloaded, and that's it. There has to be some better standards. There has to be some bigger gateways that are put up that kind of help alleviate anybody's ability to make a game. I mean, it went from somewhat curated, and I remember there were interviews on, I believe it was IGN. I think Jose Otero was doing interviews with the curation officer or whatever for Nintendo. I think it was. Don't quote me on it, but I think they were talking in the beginning about how they were curating up games and how the standard was a little bit different, and then it felt like it completely went out the window years later when you're digging through shovelware. And so if they could fix that, that would be fantastic. That would be one of the better things, because I think sometimes you miss really good games, really good, really nicely developed, beautiful software, because it's amidst a mountain of games that you can't really tell. So if it's not specifically marketed, or if it's not, think about A Blossom's Tale, right? That I love that game. They have a sequel on Nintendo Switch. If somebody wasn't shouting it from the rooftops in the beginning of the console generation, it would have been buried, and I would have never played that game. Same thing with Golf Story and Sports Story. These like indie gems that are on there buried because of how many games come out for the software. So I'm very curious to see what they do with the software. I would love to see. One of the things I always missed from the 3DS era was the Street Pass. I played a lot of the games on there, the night game and stuff like that, the puzzle game, but it was always curious to me, especially at the time I was living in New York, how many people I would pass with a 3DS. I wish they would come back with something like that on the Switch. I find it probably impractical to do because of how big and hefty the system will be. So there's probably not going to be an expectation that it's going to be, with you at all times, even though it boasts being portable. But I'd still like to see it kind of come back and be integrated, because it's one of the better ideas they've had in terms of interactivity that doesn't actually involve interaction. If that makes any sense, because Nintendo's usually pretty protected, right? I'd like to see the friend code system updated in the next Switch. I feel like it's cumbersome. It's purposely cumbersome for that. But yeah, I'm very curious. I'm very, very excited for the in-depth look. I'm sure we'll be talking about it soon. But as for the trailer, my last thoughts on it, and then I got to move on, right? Because I didn't think I would be talking about it this long on the podcast. But love the trailer. like a lot of people have been saying that it's weird that it's evolving from a Switch 1, right? But if you're having iterative hardware, you want to really make the differences known. And so why not start from a base of the original console to give everybody an idea that things are changing? The high-resolution renders, the movement in 3D space one of the things that really impressed me, and this may be getting into the weeds, but was how well the movement is choreographed, that you can feel the magnets coming together. So whoever created the software, whoever created the trailer, kudos to you, because it looks really good. The paint kind of coming on as we're seeing on screen right now, giving the Joy-Cons color, even though they're in like a matted black, is such a nifty move. It also offers a lot more versatility in terms of selling you more of those controllers for different color schemes that you might like, and making it more personable and personal to your experience. But yeah, it was an excellent trailer. Also, the innuendo of them becoming mice by becoming mice and scurrying across the screen. Absolutely excellent and flawless execution. It was short. It was sweet. It got to the point, and it showed off the hardware in a way that was not confusing and it was very direct. So I thought it was a very, very good teaser, a very well done way to say, hey, we're coming out with new hardware. It is a little bit samey, but it is different, and here are the differences, and here's why you should be excited. So I thought it was a really well executed trailer. I didn't think it was in response to any of the leaks. I just think that, hey, this is just what they wanted to do. So anyway, that is the Nintendo Switch 2 first look. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the Hall of Fame results, and then we are going to come back and talk about the Christopher Reeve documentary, Super/Man. What a good and emotional documentary that is. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.